Welcome to the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. I am your host, John Durante, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome back Christoph Guttentag, who is the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at Duke University. Now, Christoph was with us back on episode 86. His episode got so many downloads that we played him again for episode 131 for our Playback Wednesday series. Christoph, this is a true honor. How are you?
I am doing great. John, thank you so much for having me back. I really enjoyed our previous conversation and looking forward to helping your listeners again understand this opaque, unclear, confusing process that a lot of students go through. And let's see if we can help them navigate it a little bit better.
Well, based on the downloads of the first episode, I'm sure that's exactly what's going to happen. So, Christoph, again, welcome back, and let's get right to it. Since that last interview, Christoph, what are some new initiatives or changes that Duke University has implemented in its admissions process or academic programs overall?
Yeah, the first thing that I want to mention is something that we haven't changed. We are still test optional for the coming year. So for students applying in the fall of 2024, for enrollment in the fall of 2025, we're still test optional. We take that seriously. We can talk more about it later if you'd like, and that's not going to change. Now, after this coming year, who knows? We may look at our policy the way other colleges have, but we've made no decision. We haven't started any serious analysis, so we're still going to be test optional. So for seniors applying in the fall of 2024, still test optional. That's the first thing. Next thing is that this got a little bit of publicity. We changed our approach to application essays. We have a rating system. We rate things on a scale of 1 to 5. And up until last year, the application essays, the big essay and any supplemental essays, were rated on that same scale. And one of the things that we decided a year ago was that the essays were no longer a reliable indicator of someone's writing ability. There's so many ways to get help on the essay, not the least of which is AI, that we felt that it wasn't fair to the student and it wasn't fair to us to give a quality of writing rating to the essay. So we no longer give it that rating. It's no longer part of how we assess an application in the sense of a rating. We still pay a great deal of attention to the essay. It's still an important part of the application, but we use it as a way to understand who this person is as an applicant, as a person, as someone who's going to become part of our community and going to contribute something to our community and take it and benefit from being part of our community. So the essay now is being read for insight into the person rather than an assessment of their writing ability. Still an important part, just being treated a little bit differently. We may have added some optional supplemental questions since the last time we spoke. For a long time, we required the main essay that in the common application or in the coalition application, students had a choice there, and then we gave them a choice of a couple of optional supplemental essays, and we still give students the opportunity to submit 2 short supplemental essays if they want. But we've given them a choice of 5 now to choose from. So there are some options there so that they can answer the kinds of questions that they think are going to best reflect who they are. So that's a little bit of a change. The other thing in the university that's coming and that's going to affect the students who are applying this year, Trinity College of Arts and Sciences, which is one of our 2 colleges that students apply to, and the larger of the 2, 80% of our students enroll in Trinity College, is rolling out a new curriculum that is starting in the fall of 2025, and we are just really, really excited by it and about it. I'm still learning about it. It we still are going to have majors that students take. They're still going to be able to do minors and certificate programs, but the structure of the requirements is changing. A little more emphasis on the arts, some wonderful changes in terms of both interdisciplinary work and small class learning. So we're really excited by that. And the final thing is that they have, since we last spoke, they have expanded the opportunities for what we call pre-orientation programs for incoming students. It used to be that maybe a quarter of the incoming first year students would arrive a week early and they'd participate in really interesting, immersive pre orientation programs, whether it was community service oriented, whether it was research oriented. One of them was marine sciences oriented. And what they've done is they've expanded these pre orientation programs to make them available to the entire entering first year class. So that's a great way for students to start to create the bonds and the friendships that are so important. So those are just some of the changes. We're constantly thinking about ways to do things a little better.
Well, we appreciate that, and there's definitely a lot to unpack here. You talked about the fact that you changed your approach to the application essay. You're no longer putting it on that rating scale. So I'm just curious, Christoph, you mentioned again that rating scale of 1 to 5. What are the different categories within that holistic approach, right? Within all of the pieces of the application that you are using in the rating scale. If you don't mind just unpackaging it a little bit for our
So
listeners, I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear how Duke University unpackages that.
yeah, we give ratings in four different areas. The first is the strength of the curriculum that the student is taking, the strength of the courses that a student is taking in high school in the context of what's available at the school. Oh, that's not an absolute scale. We're really asking ourselves within the context of what's available for that student at that school, how challenging are their courses uh, compared to the norm and compared to what other good students do. So that's the first. The second is the grades that they receive in their academic courses from the ninth grade on. And we look at the pattern of grades, whether there's been a change over time, where that change might occur, and how that happens as they progress through their high school career. You've got the curriculum, you've got the grades, you have the extracurricular activities, what they do outside of the classroom when they're not doing their schoolwork. Now, it doesn't have to be non-academic. Some students like to involve themselves in whether it's an academic club, a math club, a foreign language club or organization. Some students study during the summer. Some students have to work to help their family or to help with their own expenses. Some students have to help take care of a family member. Students have all kinds of different responsibilities that we like to be aware of, or they're involved in the marching band, or they're involved in the orchestra, or they're involved in sports. There are 1,000 things that students can do, and what we look for is not the specific activity. We don't think that some activities are better than other activities. What we look for is their level of engagement, the impact that they've had, their contribution, whether they've made something better. Those sorts of things are what we look at when we're thinking about their so-called extracurricular activities. And then the letters of recommendation from the counselor and the teachers, which really give us a sense of what the student is like in the student community, in the school community, what a student is like in the classroom. So those are the things that we rate, and they're tools for us to get a sense of the applicant. In the end, they're just a tool and they're just a guide, and they don't determine the decision for us. They help us understand the student, they help us compare students, But in the end, it's a judgment that we make. It's a decision that we make as we talk about the student, as we think about the student in terms of both what they would add to the Duke community and how they would benefit from the Duke community. And those are personal judgments. Those are difficult decisions. There are a lot of students. I will say the overwhelming majority of students who apply are very, very well qualified. It's not a matter of distinguishing qualified students from non-qualified students. It's really picking among qualified students who are really, really appealing.
Well, we really appreciate that insight. And I'm just going to review a couple of things. There are four things that you're looking for. Number one, the strength of the curriculum. And I really appreciate that you emphasize based on the context of the high school. So, students, if your high school offers 10 advanced placement courses and perhaps they put restrictions on how many you can take in junior and senior year compared to a friend who's in a neighboring district, and perhaps that school has over 20 APs without restrictions, they are looking at you based on the context of what was available to you. So, number one, what did you take within that curriculum? Number two, the grades. They're looking at your patterns of grades, any changes, ramps that you built for yourself over the 4 years. Of course, number three, you mentioned extracurricular activities, but it's not so much what the specific activity is, it's really your contribution to it. And I also appreciate that you mentioned two very important things. Number one, students, if you hold a job, that's something very important for people like Christoph to know, so that if they see on your activity sheet that you don't have that many activities because, frankly, you work every day after school, they need to know that. Otherwise, you're leaving it up to them to speculate. But perhaps more importantly, when you hold a job and you hold a job for a long time, that's where you're learning a lot about leadership, about responsibility, showing up on time, performing, working with colleagues, working with a boss. So there's really a lot that is said about a student that, is working, or as Christoph said, if you're responsible to take care of a family member, perhaps an elderly relative, maybe you need to accompany them to a doctor's appointment because they don't speak English well and you're there to help them. Whatever it is, let the admissions people know about it so that you're not leaving it to them to speculate. And lastly, those letters of recommendation, which we'll certainly unpack later. But I also appreciate earlier where you talked about your pre orientation programs and how they have been expanded. And I'm finding that that is so important in terms of building community, right? However many thousands of students come to a place like Duke University for the first time, it's probably their first time that they're away from home for so long. So the importance of building that community early needs to be emphasized. And I mention it because I read that your retention rate is 98%, which is one of the highest in the country. So, what are some unique aspects of campus life at Duke? And perhaps, Christoph, can you share some of your more popular extracurricular opportunities that keep students wanting to come back after that freshman year?
Great question. And yes, we're proud of our retention rate, and there are a number of things that make that retention rate possible. And first, of course, are the students. They're well prepared. We have the luxury of choosing students who have experience in a community, know how to engage in a community, or are committed to their own growth, are committed to being part of a college that want the kind of residential opportunity that we offer. So part of it is due to just who we are fortunate enough to enroll. That's a part of it. That helps a lot. The second is that we have a wonderful part of campus called East Campus. All of the first year students live together on East Campus. There are academic facilities on East Campus, are a concert hall, athletic facilities, library, dining facilities. East Campus is a real home for the students. Now, they spend a decent amount of time on what's called West Campus as well, but they have a home to go to where their friends are, where their classmates are, and where they're running into their classmates in the dining halls, in the residence halls, on the athletic facilities all the time. So there's a real sense of community that helps keep students engaged in the community. And I will say, parenthetically, that sense of community is a hallmark of Duke, and the support that students give one another throughout their time is part of it as well. The spirit that's part of our place is part of what helps students feel like they belong. So there's that sense of belonging is part of it as well. The pre-orientation programs that I mentioned are part of it. So already, well before classes start, they already have a cohort of a couple of dozen people that they've spent a week with, uh, working together, learning together, studying together. Uh, that so there's a lot of work that's done on the part of student affairs to make sure that people feel connected. We'll talk about advising a little bit later, but there are multiple advisors that connect with students in the residence halls, outside of the residence halls, to make sure that they understand how they can get access to everything that's available. So those things together make for a place that students want to return to, and they do so. Almost all of them do so. The kinds of activities that students are involved in vary widely. Service, broadly defined, community service, helping others in the community on campus, is a big part of what students do. And they do it naturally. There's no service requirement at Duke. So students come to Duke with a lot of experience with service. And I think at least several years ago, I was told that service, community service as a category, had the greatest participation of anything at Duke. So that's part of it. Obviously, students like to participate in athletics at Duke. We've got about 8% of our undergraduates are recruited athletes.
Hmm.
We're a Division I school. We're in the ACC, which
I
no,
heard about
which
your
now has
athletics.
representation from other coasts other than the Atlantic. Um, and so a relatively small part. I mean, fewer than 10% of our students are recruited athletes, but a lot of students participate in club level sports where it's a little more casual, but they get to compete against other teams. A lot of participation in intramurals and recreational sports. So the weather is nice here. Yeah, and so it's easy to do things outside. It's easy to get involved in recreational activities. Obviously, that's part of it. But there are just a lot of organizations of all kinds. Whether it's, I was just having lunch with a student who's organizing a conference that's run by a group called the Business Oriented Women. I mean, that's a relatively more serious organization. They're fun organizations. Students like to go to sporting events, but they like to find things that they enjoy, whether it's an outing club, whether it's an educational experience, whether it's volunteering. There's no, let me put it this way, there's no one thing or one kind of thing that students do more than other things. They're very widely dispersed among a broad range of activities and kinds of activities. They're involved in music and art and theater, um, lots of a cappella groups, lots of
Hmm.
performing arts groups, lots of dance, lots of kinds of dance groups. There it is an incredibly active group of students.
Well, I love that, and I appreciate the overview. And I'm glad I asked the question because what I'm finding in the podcast episodes is that those schools that have such high percentage in terms of their retention rate, they're very mindful in terms of what they do with their students before they arrive on campus, but
Hmm.
also when they arrive on campus. For example, you talk about your East Campus where all the freshmen they live together on that side of campus. And that really builds community because all of those students, they're there and they're in the same boat.
Yep.
They're all new. Many
Yep.
of them are from, throughout the country, outside the country, what have you, and they are all there for the same reason. So when a school like Duke University is so mindful of bringing them together, building community, you're going to keep them happy, not only during freshman year, but for many years to come. So we spoke earlier about the four parts of your holistic application review. Christoph, can you break it down just a little further for us? In other words, is there anything more important than the other? again in that holistic review in terms of your applications?
Well, one of the things that I want to make sure your listeners understand is we are committed to reading every application through from beginning to end. And that we feel that that's our responsibility to the applicants. If they've gone to the trouble of putting together, filling out, and submitting an application, we feel it's our responsibility to read the whole thing. So, and part of holistic review means, if you will, that you're taking the whole thing into account. And we want to do that for our applicants. So every application is read from beginning to end, every single one. We never stop just at the transcript or after the student's part of the application. We'll make sure that we look at everything. So once we've done that, what we find is that most of the students have two things that are typical of competitive applicants. They have a strong academic record. And I think that we don't emphasize class rank. We don't emphasize that it has to be a perfect grade point average. I was actually just looking at the high school transcript of a student who was mentioned to me by another student who's a terrific writer, um, and blogger. And I was looking at her high
Hmm.
school transcript, and it was not a perfect transcript. I mean, there were B's there, and it was fine. She's a wonderful student, wonderful writer. So, but typically the students have strong grades in a strong curriculum, and they are among the best students in their school. They do not have to be the valedictorian or the salutatorian. They do not have to be right at the tippity top, but there's always a group of students who are that group of good, strong students at or near the top of the class, and it helps to be among them. And then, obviously, we want them to be actively engaged in their extracurricular activities. Now, what starts to set students apart are a couple of attributes, a couple of words we use. One of the words we use is impact. We're looking for students who have an impact in some area. It can be academic, it can be non-academic, but somewhere where they're making a difference. Beyond that, one of the phrases we commonly use in our office is, are they making something better? And I like that phrase. It's that notion of whatever you're involved in, and really it can be anything, really, uh, anything legal and appropriate, obviously. Um, but are they making something better? And it doesn't have to be on a national scale. It doesn't have to be. It can be in a classroom. It can be in a class. It can be in a community. It can be in the school. It can be in a scout troop. Whatever it is. Are they making something better? Are they having a positive impact on whatever it is that they are choosing to be involved in? And it's the reason why it makes sense for students to be involved in things that they care about. We don't use the word passion. I prefer not to use the word passion because I think it actually puts pressure on students to feel like they have to have a passion project. When Jerry Seinfeld did our commencement speech this spring, he used the word fascination.
Hmm.
Find things that fascinate you, and I love that.
Hmm.
I wish I'd thought of it, um, but he did. And so that notion of it doesn't have to be a passion, it doesn't have to be all consuming, but that notion of something that fascinates you, that you're sort of game to dig into. So making something better, finding something that fascinates you, and it can be multiple things, and it doesn't have to be the thing that you want to study in college. It can be almost anything, really. So making something better, finding something that fascinates you, and then following through on it. um, it helps to have a sense of imagination. I think that students that reveal a sense of imagination, a sense of wondering how something might be different, sort of thinking, why is this the case? And is there a different way to do things? A sense of imagination is something that we look for. um, and then the final part is we really value students that treat other students well.
Hmm.
Have you made something
So
better? And
important.
I mean, the staff in my office will tell you that that making something better and treating other people well are two of the attributes that we really look for. And that takes time, and I think you only do that when you're using a holistic process.
Well, we really appreciate that, and it makes a lot of sense. So before I break it down, I do want to repeat that quote in the beginning that you said a few times, actually, and I'm going to say it again. Students, Christoph said, and I quote, "We are committed to reading your application from beginning to end, every single one, every single application." So students, be mindful of this marketing package that you're trying to put together. Take each piece, understand what it's supposed to represent, the purpose of it, and make sure that you're always putting your best foot forward in each and every piece so that when they're reading all of it, they get the holistic view of who you are as a student. Now, you talked about most students having two qualities, which makes a lot of sense. Number one, strong academic record. And again, you mentioned in the context of what's available to them in terms of the curriculum from their high school, which makes a lot of sense because you want to make sure that you're admitting students that are going to be able to handle the work on your campus. So, what's a good indicator of that? Past academic success, right? And hopefully they've had a lot of success while they're in the high school. The second thing, you want them to be among the best in their schools in terms of the type of community member they are. So, in addition to looking at the academics and whether they could handle the work, you want to know what kind of community member they're going to be. How are they going to contribute? What kind of roommate are they going to be? What kind of classmate are they going to be? And then I love what you talked about, making something better. Look, Duke University is far bigger than any one of us. But what are you going to do during your time there to make it better? The type of community member you're going to be. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for all of that. And unpackaging the whole application review just a little bit more, Christoph, can you explain the benefits, if there are any, and potential drawbacks of applying through early decision versus regular decision at Duke?
Absolutely. Early decision. We have a binding early decision program. It's an earlier deadline our deadline is typically November 1st to November 2nd, whereas regular decision generally has a January 2nd deadline. It's a much smaller pool. Early decision is, this year early decision was about 6,200 uh, applications. This year's regular decision pool was about 48,000. So
Hmm.
it makes a difference. It's a smaller pool. We fill about 45% of the class through early decision,
Wow.
and because students are making a binding commitment, because they are saying that if we admit them in December, that they will enroll. That is of value to us. We like to have a cohort of students who are willing to make that level of commitment, and when you work out all of the math, you end up with a somewhat higher admit rate for early decision. Um, this year, our overall early decision admit rate was just under 13%. Now, that does include some recruited athletes. It does
Hmm.
include students who are applying through the QuestBridge program. So, for most students, the admit rate for early decision was probably around 10%, but that still compares pretty favorably with a 4% admit rate for regular decision. So there's an advantage to applying early decision. And of course, if you're admitted, your work is done. You've completed
Hmm.
the college admissions process. The downside, the disadvantage is, first of all, you have to be in a position to be able to make that kind of commitment in October. When you think of it, the deadline is November 1st, so you have to be ready in October. Not everybody is ready to make that commitment. We understand that not everybody is ready to make that commitment. There are a lot of factors that go into applying to college, and even if you know that you want to apply early decision, where to apply early decision is itself something that students have to figure out. And of course, if a student is applying for financial aid, they don't have the opportunity to compare financial aid packages and to consider merit scholarships from other schools if they're applying early decision. I will say this, of the students that apply to Duke early decision and who are applying for financial aid, the overwhelming majority of those students receive financial aid packages that they are comfortable with or that they can live with and that their families are okay with. I can generally count on the fingers of one hand the number of students who we admit early decision who then can't enroll for financial reasons.
Right.
So
Right.
people should feel pretty comfortable with it, but it is still a limitation. And for all of the colleges out there that are offering merit scholarships to lots of students, it doesn't give students the opportunity to compare packages.
Well, great insight. And as always, we appreciate it. I need to repeat, in the early decision round, you received 6,200 applications, and about 45% of the class was admitted through your early decision round. So I just want to repeat that again, because if there's ever a way to demonstrate your interest, students applying early decision, if you know, for example, here, you want to go to Duke University, I repeat, 6,200 applications were received in the early decision round. 45% were admitted in that early decision round. So, something to consider. Now, you also mentioned in the regular decision, you had about 48,000 application, which gives you about 54,200
Yeah.
applications overall. Christoph, what is the institutional goal in terms of how many freshmen you want to admit from that overall application pool of approximately 54,200?
Yeah, and let me make sure before we go on, I want to make sure
Sure.
that your listeners understand um, our admit rate for early decision was around 13%. We
Right.
filled 45% of the class,
Hmm.
but we admitted about 13% of the applicants. I didn't want them to think that we were going to admit 45% of our early decision.
Understood. Thanks for the
Anyway,
clarification.
so the goal in creating the class, our goals plural in creating the class, because there are always multiple goals. First of all, is to get the right size.
Hmm.
We look for an entering first year class of between 1,720 and 1,730 first year students, divided 80% in Trinity College of Arts and Sciences and 20% in the Pratt School of Engineering. That is the most important thing. We don't want a class that's too small. We don't want a class that's too big. Both of those create their own issues. And we've been successful in getting a class right along that number. So that's the most important part. Beyond that, there are things we want to accomplish, but we don't have specific numerical goals. We like to have North and South Carolina, which we consider our backyard, well represented in the student body. I believe in this first year class, that'll be around 18% from the Carolinas. So 82% from outside of the Carolinas. I like to have a healthy representation from outside of the United States. Anywhere from 10 to 14% of the class will be international, depending on how you define international. We like to have a healthy balance of students interested in different disciplines. We think about the academic breadth. We like to have a healthy representation of students from all over the country. We think it's very important also that students come to Duke from every economic background. We pay attention to that and to have an economically diverse student body. So we're looking for a nice representation of different viewpoints and different backgrounds and different experiences and different academic interests in the student body without having any particular number that we're trying to reach or any particular percentage that we're trying to reach. And we're given a very healthy flexibility in terms of creating the class that allows us to find really the interesting students and the talented students that are and the nice people that are going to
Hmm.
add something to the student body.
Well, I appreciate you talking about the fact that 18% of your students are from the Carolinas and you have 82% that are from the rest of the country. And of course, your international students,
Yeah,
because there are institutions. I know of one called UNC right down the block from you there, right? Where they're mandated to accept only 18% from outside of their
right.
great state. Not the case as a private school here. We're talking Duke University. So you keep on emphasizing the academics, right? You want to make sure that you admit students that can handle the work, those students that are going to be great community members. And so I guess, and tell me if you agree or disagree, a piece of advice to students to say, don't write about what you think the admissions people at Duke want to hear about, what you think a typical Duke student is, because if that's the frame that you approach it with, you're probably going to sound like thousands of other kids, right? So you want to take a different approach, I would imagine. You want to show how you're going to stand out. What have you done? What is your thought process? How are you going to contribute? What are your thoughts on that, Christoph?
I think the college essay, it may be the most vexing part of the application
Hmm.
for students, uh, because everything else, you know, they're taking these courses. They know they want to do well. They have a choice of courses. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But they know what's expected of them. They choose their activities, hopefully because it's things that they're interested in and that mean something to them. And so that's driven by what's inside of them. Figuring out what to write about in the essay and then doing a good job, I think is just so difficult, and we are very sympathetic to students who face this issue. I like the prompts that the Common Application and the Coalition application have in their applications. I think they give students the opportunity to reflect, to think about what matters to them, and to write about it. The most important thing that I can stress when students are writing the essay is that we read them as if somebody is speaking to us. And what I find consistently is that students feel like they have to create a great piece of writing. And I find that unfortunate. It's understandable. I, there are probably 100 books on writing the college
Hmm.
application essay. And I understand that they want to do a great job with the essay. But when I'm sitting in my dining room
Hmm.
on a Tuesday morning, looking at my laptop and reading essays and reading applications, what I'm trying to do is picture this student. I'm trying to picture this student as a member of potential member of our community. And one of the ways I do that is to read their essay and to see how they express themselves and what they have to tell us about themselves. The language of the spoken word, I find, tends to be much more useful, much more powerful, much more direct, and much more helpful in terms of understanding who this person is. If it's not a word you would say, don't put it in the essay. And that's one thing. The other is, I find that students feel as if they have to paint a picture of whatever situation they're describing using lots of evocative adjectives and adverbs. And my opinion is that that slows things down and gets in the way. If I'm describing to you in a conversation how hot it is outside, right? I don't need to use the word miasma or miasma. Uh, uh, I'm embarrassed that I don't know the right way to pronounce it. But I don't have to use a fancy. Let me step back. If I'm describing to you how hot and humid it is outside, I don't need to use a word that has 3 or 4 or 5 syllables. I
Hmm.
could just be direct. I could just say it. It made me uncomfortable. It made me sweat. It hit me like a punch in the chest. Um, I don't have to use fancy words. I don't have to paint a particularly detailed picture. I use nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs very sparingly, and I can paint a decent picture. Directness, simple language, spoken language, and thinking about what can we learn about you. You don't have to impress us with your writing. That's what makes a good essay.
Well, I love that. That's great insight in terms of the essay. You talk about being yourself, and I'm going to quote you. You said, if it's not a word you won't say, don't put it in the essay, right? And so I see you shaking your head. I know that the people listening are not seeing you shaking your head, but obviously you read hundreds, right, if not thousands of essays. And, I'm sure that's something that you see all the time. People using words that they can't even pronounce, they probably can't even spell, yet they feel that that's what you're looking for because obviously Duke University is a highly academic place. But again, Christoph is talking about the importance of being yourself. And again, if it's not a word you would say, don't put it in that essay. So
Yes.
we've touched upon a lot of pieces. I want to continue to unpackage the overall application review. So, in terms of the letters of recommendation, what qualities or details in a teacher's letter make it particularly effective in enhancing an applicant's profile? And can you share any examples?
That is a great question, and I'm really glad you asked that question. I think there are two keys to what I think is a great letter of recommendation. One is to have a teacher or counselor, depending on what kind of letter it is, focus on a relatively small set of defining characteristics of the student without having to paint a picture of the student overall, because we'll piece that together. The 3 or 4 or 5 aspects of a student that really define them in the classroom. And there are lots of ways to do that, right? Some students are creative, some students are persistent, some students are disruptive, right? Most teachers won't typically tell us if a student is disruptive, but they'll talk about someone who is the first to volunteer, or they'll talk about someone who doesn't volunteer, but when they're called on, always has the answer that everybody is helped by and impressed by. Different students bring different attributes to the classroom. We are very comfortable with teachers, certainly teachers, counselors as well, but especially teachers focusing on 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 attributes that really define that student, that are really special or striking about that student, giving us what those are, and then giving us examples. Examples make letters of recommendation very powerful. So if someone says this student was particularly imaginative and it's an English class and they can talk about their interpretation of a piece of literature that hadn't been brought up by a student before, and how that made people see this piece of literature in a somewhat different way. Great example. Examples are powerful. Small number of attributes are powerful. Those are the keys to good letters of recommendation.
Well, we really appreciate that. And I love how you're talking about examples and telling stories. If a teacher, and I know that there's a lot of teachers and counselors that listen to the podcast, if you're writing about what an admissions rep can already find on the transcript or on the activity sheet, it really is a missed opportunity. It's not adding anything to the overall package. So, to Christoph's point, I remember recently someone said they gave an example of a letter that they had read from a teacher who said, when I plan my lessons, I have to be mindful of the follow up questions that I'm going to ask because so and so, whatever the student's name is, I know that they're going to be at a different level and they're going to challenge me, to really be on my toes. So when I plan my lessons, I have to be really mindful because that's how this child thinks. This is how this child learns. And so, I guess when you hear a story like that, you get more about the student, right? As opposed to saying he's a great student in class, which, by the way, if you look at the transcript, he has an A plus in that class, so it doesn't really add anything. Am I
That's
right, Christoph?
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we have the luxury, we have the luxury of how we get to choose our students, and those kinds of students where they're offering something beyond just good academic work. That's a value to us. And for some students it's going to be what you just described. And for other students it's going to be something along the lines of they went out of their way to help other students who were struggling to understand. They could have just been comfortable being the best student in the class, but they wanted to make sure that this subject that was so interesting to them would be interesting to the other students as well. So those sorts of qualities, however they manifest themselves in the classroom, are really valuable for us to know about.
Well, it shows their empathy, right? You
Yep.
talked earlier about wanting community members who, frankly, are nice people and who are going
Yes.
to contribute. So the examples that you're sharing really show a lot of empathy. So I
Yep.
hope that everyone is taking notes because, Christoph, your examples are so insightful and we truly appreciate it. So, unpackaging the overall application even further, we talked about the fact that Duke University is still test optional. Christoph, can you share with our listeners the percentage of students who applied and who were ultimately admitted that did not submit their test scores? Because there's a lot of people out there that think this test optional movement, if you will, is a myth.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. About half of our students did not submit standardized test scores, and about a third of the students we admitted did not submit standardized test scores. What we find, our applicant pool, and certainly the students we admit, tend to be strong students. And I guess that goes without saying. They tend to
Hmm.
be accomplished, they tend to challenge themselves, they tend to do well. So students that do well in the classroom in challenging courses and consistent excellence academically, on the whole, they tend to do better in standardized tests as well. So if we're biased in favor of strong academic students, then as a rule, those students are going to be more likely to submit standardized test scores. We are very careful. We do not have a rating that we include in our calculation for standardized tests. We make a real effort when we're reading applications and when we are getting ready to read applications to accept the information that is given to us and making the best decision we can with the information that's in front of us. We do not ask, what would this student have received? What might this student have received who did not submit standardized test scores? That is not a question we ask. We don't wonder what a student's test scores were or might have been if they didn't submit them. We take into account the information that we have, that we are given, and we make the best decision we can. And we don't make an assumption about a student who doesn't submit standardized test scores. It's We take what we've got, we make the best decisions we can, and we are very comfortable with who we've admitted and who we enroll.
Well, we appreciate that. And as a follow up, Christoph, where do you think it's going? Where do you think the test optional movement is going over the next 4 or 5 years?
That's a very, very good question. I wish I knew. I wish I knew. Clearly there are colleges that are deciding to require standardized test scores again. I think the impulse for having some kind of external indication of a student's academic preparation makes sense for a lot of colleges. It's a value if a student has something from outside, whether it's standardized test scores, whether it's advanced placement scores, whether it's some other way of assessing a student's academic preparation from outside of the particular high school. I can understand why some colleges find that valuable as they're making admissions decisions. It's a very individual process for every college. It's one of those things that every college has to make the decision for themselves. And we all started from the same place, which was students were unable to take the tests. And now it's changed where, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most
Right.
part, students have the opportunity to take the test. And now it's a matter of, do they submit? It's a very difficult issue for students. I am completely sympathetic that students don't know whether or not to submit standardized test scores college by college. It's a very individual issue for each college, and we're all trying to do the best we can. We've decided for another year to be test optional, and then we'll take another look a year from now.
Well, we appreciate the insight. And of course, always check the individual university's website for the latest information. So, again, thank you, Christoph. And I was also curious, do you use the students' high school GPA as indicated on the transcript, or do you recalculate it using your own metrics? And if so, what do you look at from a student's academic record and how do you evaluate them? For example, are you looking only at the core courses? Is it a combination? Are you looking at everything? Any insight in terms of how you do that, Christoph, would be greatly appreciated.
Thanks for asking that question. And it's a little of a mix. We do not recalculate the grade point average. We
Mhm.
take whatever grade point average the school gives us. At the same time, we do not compare the grade point average from one school with the grade point average from another school because every school does it differently. Every school weights different kinds of courses differently. They
Hmm.
have different curricula. So it's a useful piece of information as we're looking at all of the applicants from a school, but we don't recalculate on a standard scale and we don't compare a GPA from school A and a GPA from school B and think that that tells us anything meaningful. That's why we look at the transcript. It's an essential part of how we look at an application is looking at the transcript. It's probably the first actual document we look at when we are reviewing an application. Before we look at anything else, we see the transcript and we see the transcript as it's presented to us by the school. And we do our best to understand what that transcript is telling us, both in terms of the courses a student's taking and their progression through high school. And we pay the greatest amount of attention to the academic courses, especially in the five primary areas: English, math, science, history, foreign language. Those are the ones that we pay the most attention to. We pay less attention to non-academic courses. Some people will get a grade in PE or they'll get a grade in orchestra. Um, when we're looking at the transcript and the information that we want from the transcript, we're trying to get an academic sense of the student. We'll learn about the other things in the rest of the application.
Well, I appreciate that answer because it goes to show that, yes, the GPA is important. It's a number. Everybody out there wants to know what that number is. But you talked about how you look at the transcript as the essential piece. And it really does make sense because if you look at the transcript holistically, right, we always talk about how the application is reviewed holistically. But if you look at the transcript holistically, in other words, what was available to you? What courses did you take? How did you perform? That really is an amazing indicator, right? If you look at that to help determine the type of student academically they're going to be once they're on your campus. So we really appreciate that, Christoph. And I know that Duke offers optional supplemental essays, which we talked about earlier. So, what are you looking for in those supplemental optional essays that are not available in other parts of your overall application should a student decide to submit them?
Before I answer that, let me add a little
Sure,
something about the transcript.
please.
We understand the transcript in the context of the school's profile, right? Every
Hmm.
school submits a profile, and that's where we're going to find out what courses they offer, what the honors courses are, whether they offer AP or International Baccalaureate or other courses, how they weight courses, whether there's a limit on the number of advanced placement courses that a student can take. The school profile really gives us the context to understand the transcript, and the counselor recommendation, especially if there's something different about a student's transcript, helps explain it. On to the supplemental questions. John, I think you actually have it exactly right. It's what is not elsewhere in the application. Students are complex, unique individuals. They're bringing all kinds of experiences to bear on who they are and how they're navigating high school and how they're navigating the college admissions process. And we feel that we want to make sure that whatever's important to them, they can express to us. And what we found over time is that the structure of the application with the particular essay questions that are asked in the main part of the application often, I should say sometimes, make students feel like, oh, there's more to me than I want to talk about. So what we've done is we've given students the opportunity to pick one or two from a list of 5 questions that talk about a whole wide range of things, some of them personal, some of them intellectual, some of them social, that they can tell us about that may be important to them. And if none of the questions meet their needs, then they don't have to answer any of them. But it's just that opportunity for us to get to know them as they are as well as we can.
Well, we really appreciate that, Christoph. Thank you so much. And can you share what other support services are available at Duke, such as academic advising, mental health resources, and even career counseling to, again, help students once they are on your campus?
We understand that students come to Duke typically well prepared, but also that the experience of being in college presents them with so many more choices than they've had before and so many more decisions that they've had to make, that they have to make. And we want to help guide them through that and to help them make good choices while they're at Duke and to make choices that are going to allow themselves to move in the direction that they want to go as they go through college and then beyond. There, as you mentioned, there is academic advising, and there is academic advising not just in the advising center. There is academic advising in each department. As soon as a student declares a major, and they can declare more than one major, there are advisors within each department and within each program and within each certificate to help students navigate that particular terrain. If a student wants to create their own course of study, there are advisors particularly for that. There are advisors to help students declare a major. There are advisors to help students choose courses. There are advisors to help students navigate through a major. As you mentioned, there are career advisors, and they start working with students very early because they understand that thinking about a career and maybe changing your mind about a career isn't something that happens in the senior year. It happens as you choose courses, it happens as you make summer plans, it happens as you study abroad. So the Career Advising Center and the kinds of career fairs that they sponsor and the personal advice they give students and the advice in creating a resume and a cover letter, that's all part of of what they offer. There are advisors in the residence halls. There's an advising system especially for students as they make their postgraduate plans, whether it's business school, whether it's law school, whether it's medical school, whether it's going to graduate school in a discipline. They're advisors specifically for those areas. There are, as you mentioned, mental health and wellness advisors. We have a wonderful wellness center that's not just oriented for students in, who need some short term support, but who help students throughout their time at Duke navigate the terrain that is going to college at a place where you've got high expectations and you want to manage those well. So there's great wellness advising. There's advising in the financial aid office. Students' financial circumstances change, and our financial aid office really works hard to be as responsive as they can be to students as their financial circumstances change. So there's advising in the financial aid office. There's religious and spiritual advising. We have a very active religious life program. Students come to us sometimes with very clearly defined ideas, and sometimes they're really searching. And the support that's provided by religious life in all kinds of areas is very helpful and very useful and very appreciated by the students. There's a writing center, there's a tutoring center, there are cultural centers. We work very hard to provide support in all kinds of areas for the students that are coming to Duke. And really, all they have to do is ask, and all they have to do is talk to people, and people are very happy to guide them in the right direction and to get them to talking with people that'll be helpful.
Well, we really appreciate that. And, there's a lot of things that resonate with me throughout this conversation. Number one, how mindful you are to select the best students to come to your campus to add to this beautiful thing that we call Duke University. And just like your application review is holistic, the look at the transcript is a holistic review. Your approach to wellness for your students really is holistic because you really have something for everyone, whether it's career advising, selecting courses, selecting a major. Overall, you have so much in terms of your wellness and so much more that it's really wonderful to hear you articulate all of that. Christoph, once again, this has been an awesome conversation. It's such an honor to have you back. But before I get to my last question, I have to ask, is there a question that I didn't ask, or perhaps a topic that I simply didn't bring up that you'd like to leave with our listeners now?
You know, we've spoken on more than one occasion. You do a great job of bringing up subjects that are important to the people that are listening to your podcast. I think the one thing I'd say, and in a way, it's leading into your final question, I think, is um, things work out. And I've spoken with so many students who ended up at Duke, not at Duke, uh, a- who thought they wanted one thing, they thought they wanted one college or one kind of college, ended up at a different kind of college, ended up at a different college or university, and are just so happy and can't imagine themselves anywhere else. And I think that as parents, when we're at this point of transition, and we want so much for our children, there's nothing like that we tend to, I think, sometimes invest more into this particular decision on the part of the child and on the part of the institution than it deserves. Our children will be fine. the
Hmm.
the path of our children, the general path of our children through life, is strongly already in place by the time they apply to college. And for most of the students, the specific place where they go to college is not going to change the primary direction of their life. It's going to alter it a little bit, but for most of the people, most of the time, they will end up at a place where they are going to be happy, where they're going to make friends, where they are going to prepare for a lifetime of meaning and impact. And if they've created a good list of colleges that that meet their needs, if they've given thought to what they want out of college, and with the help of counselors like yourself, create a great list of colleges that all of which are going to meet their needs, they will be just fine.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, you said things will work out. And it's a reminder to all students and parents. There's over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States alone. There are many schools that are the right fit for each and every student. However, not every school is for you. So, as Christoph said, create a good list of colleges that meet your needs, not mom and dad,
Right.
not your friends,
Right.
not your neighbors, but your needs. And if you do that and you navigate the process with that mindset, you will be successful. And as Christoph said, again, things will work out. Christoph, this is awesome. You're awesome. That last question is, as always, what are your top three pieces of advice that you would provide students and their parents getting ready for the college admissions process?
I think it's a great question, and I've answered part of it, but I will say this: look broadly at colleges. We sometimes tend to focus narrowly on the colleges that we know or that we think we know, and looking broadly at colleges is just the smartest thing to do. If there's a regret that I had in the college search for my own child, is that we didn't have the opportunity to look at colleges in the middle of the country. And I really wish
Hmm.
we had. We looked at colleges on the two coasts, and we didn't get a chance to look at colleges in the middle of the country. And I wish we had done that. So
Hmm.
look broadly is one piece of advice. The second piece of advice is it's more of a statement than a piece of advice.
Hmm.
Somebody in the family has to be organized. And it could be the child, it could be a parent, it could be somebody else, but somebody has to create the spreadsheets. Somebody has to plan the travel. Somebody has to keep track of the deadline. And that is a decision that the family needs to make, is who is going to be the organized one among us, and let them do that. And for some, it's the child. For some students, and I was certainly not like that, but for some students, like, they've got the lists, they've got the deadlines, they know where they want to visit, they know what all the requirements are, and then let them do that. But pick somebody who's going to be the organized one, and let them go with that. And my final piece of advice is have faith. It will be fine. It will work out. If you've got a good list, then you will end up just fine. And I guess I'd add one more, which is thank the people that help you.
Hmm.
That could be the teachers that write the letters of recommendation. It could be the counselor who is exhibiting patience with you as you ask question after question, or who thinks of that college that you didn't think of. The counseling community is just such an important part of this process. They work so hard. They work with everybody. Right? It's one of the great strengths is they work with everybody who they're responsible for to help them find the right place for them. So that's my final piece of advice. Thank the people that help you and show your appreciation.
Well, those are tremendous pieces of advice. And I loved how you talked about thanking the counseling community. I actually ran into you at the last NACAT conference, the national conference. By the way, I'll be at the next one in the fall,
Me
and I
too.
hope to see you again. Good. You're going to be there.
I'll
Fantastic.
be there. Yeah.
But I mention that again because you're right. The counselors, they are so amazing. They are so dedicated to helping students and families with the college process. And it's been a blessing for me to be at these national conferences more and more lately, to meet so many people and to actually really see the great work that they do. So again, a shout out to all the great counselors out there. Christoph, this has been an honor. It is such a pleasure to have you as a mentor, a teacher, and I, at this point, will call you a friend. You're awesome, and I do hope to have you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure. I love talking with you. I love running into you and spending time with you in our conferences. And you're doing great work for the students and the parents that are listening to your podcast.
Well, thank you to you. Someone like you, the Dean of Admissions at Duke University, for you to come over and give of your time. This podcast episode is well over an hour. We really appreciate that, on behalf of all the parents, students, and by the way, the counselors. We have a lot of counselors that listen. Thank you, Christoph, so much for your time and dedication to this thing we call the college admissions process. And to all the students and families out there, good luck and best wishes with the college search. Take care, all, and thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please don't forget to tell a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, John Durante, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the CAP.